just like we did the first time when we did the centralised coal and the transmission build-out back in the day. We do need to have a similar approach where if we are serious about building this infrastructure, we are going to have to take a very different approach to how we build it and get it on time so that we're not, paying more than we have to.
Thank you for that. And a key reason behind this inquiry is to hear evidence like that, because it's quite apparent, and we have lots of evidence now to show it, that the market bodies and the planning process and the approvals process isn't actually working at the moment and isn't delivering any of the things we need it to deliver. We have lots of people wanting to build renewable generation, can't get the product to market, and even if they could, they can probably only get a small proportion of it to market. What's normal capacity factor on from a solar farm? 30%.
Absolutely.
And then less network and economic constraint. It seems to me that our planning and how we look at this transition needs a fundamental shake-up and a review from economic first principles, not just least cost principles.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess social licence is a really big one that we mentioned in our submission that goes to these same conversations. We do talk about that social licence really starts in the home. When we are disincentivising the uptake of solar and batteries, we continue to delay introducing the right incentives for people who are trying to do the right thing. It really doesn't build the trust needed so that when we are building the big stuff, there is a lot of miscohesion, if you like, around that. And it's a really important conversation when we are talking about the transition.
Thank you. And would you agree that programs, when government, particularly Commonwealth government, that's never had a role in energy historically, and not even in the Constitution, at least electricity, would you agree that when Commonwealth government have to step in with programs, large programs such as Rewiring the Nation and the CIS, that they're signalling that the market or the system as we have it at the moment are failing?
I wouldn't say it's failing, but we do require a significant more investment than we've had in the past, and that has been quite necessary. It does provide a strong signal that, uncertainty for investment. Of course, there's going to have to be, over $140 billion invested in private capital to build this infrastructure, and that capital can't come into the country or with it and be invested here in this infrastructure without that certainty. And these policy signals from the federal government have been very important to do that.
I understand, and I think your point's correct. However, the ISP was designed to be able to clearly map out needs for and send signals for investment in the energy system and to assist the transition. But it's failed at that, hasn't it?
Well, it's not really supposed to be a policy roadmap. It is a...
No. I didn't say it was.
Yeah.
It's meant to map out
what's needed.
The needs, and then signal that they're then right for investment.
Yes. I mean, it's not helpful when we have to re-debate the scenarios. I mean, it's important that we have a roadmap that's not static, that is updated based on what's happening at the time and incorporates development of government policy. But I think without the lack of bipartisan on the roadmap on which we need to go, it is very difficult for investors to find that certainty, and so you do need other mechanisms.
Thank you. And I trust and hope that the bipartisanship that this committee is showing towards this inquiry will result in a report with some findings and recommendations that might help assist with all of this. Thank you, Ms Bashir.
Thank you.
If you were asked to take any questions on notice, then the committee has set out that Wednesday, 13 November is the due date for answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Recess for afternoon tea, and we will come back at 25, make it 20 to 4. Welcome back, and I now welcome representatives of HumeLink Alliance Incorporated and Regional Victoria Power Alliance. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For Hansard, will each of you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today? Who would like to go first? Mr. Katz? You're on mute.
I can. Thank you. My name is Michael Katz. I'm a director of the HumeLink Alliance and have made a submission which goes to many of the issues affecting HumeLink in the future.
Thank you. Who's next? Ms. Strong?
Andrea Strong, President of HumeLink Alliance Incorporated.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, is it?
Yes, thank you. My name is Vicky Johnson. I'm the chair of the Moorabool and Central Highlands Power Alliance, which is an incorporated group and that trades as the Regional Victoria Power Alliance. And our role is advocate for communities and landholders along two major transmission lines, Western Renewables Link and VNI West Interconnector, the Victorian length. So both those projects are in Western Victoria.
Thank you. And Wallaloo?
Hi, it's Marcia McIntyre and Cindy O'Sullivan. We're part of the executive team of the Wallaloo and Gree District Alliance Incorporated. We are... Yep. Okay.
Thank you. Do either of the groups, or does anyone have a short opening statement?
Yes, I do.
Ms. Johnson, you have the call.
A small one. I did provide you with a statement earlier today that I'm not too sure whether you would have had a chance to read. No. I might do a small one if that's okay.
Please.
Andrea, did you want to go first?
Yes, I had a statement.
Please.
Shall I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. The current system of energy planning and regulation is doing significant harm to the nation. It is both inefficient and inequitable. The objective of the national electricity market is to promote efficient investment in and efficient operation and use of electricity services. Efficient outcomes require the lowest cost electricity for the nation as a whole, taking into account all financial, environmental and social costs of options, the triple bottom line. In a major policy failure, transmission is planned in the national electricity market, ignoring environmental and social costs. The environmental and social costs are only considered at the end of the process when the project goes to government for planning approval. However, because these costs weren't considered early on in the planning process, the project option before government is often highly damaging to the environment, and the transmission network service provider then argues it's too late to build another option like underground transmission with better environmental outcomes. Prior to the federal election, Minister Chris Bowen stated that the regulatory investment test for transmission is not fit for purpose and not serving community interests, and vowed to fix it. The former Australian Energy Infrastructure Commissioner, Andrew Dyer, also said it's not fit for purpose. Excluding environmental and community costs from the cost-benefit analysis of transmission is why the regulatory system is not fit for purpose. This major flaw in transmission planning must be corrected. If environmental and social costs were taken into account, different energy market investments would be made. Instead of thousands of kilometres of overhead transmission lines, large water batteries remote from load centres like Snowy 2.0 and renewable energy projects dispersed geographically long distances from load centres, there would be underground transmission. more battery storage close to urban load centres, a concentration of renewables in regions where transmission infrastructure already exists, such as where coal-fired power stations are shutting down, offshore wind farms close to coastal urbanisation, and more rooftop solar. Governments overseas have come to the conclusion that when you take into account all the environmental costs of overhead transmission lines for the next 80 years, underground transmission is often the least cost option. Engineers are telling us that there have been major advances in underground cabling technology. It's entirely feasible, and the world is looking on in disbelief as Australia builds more overhead transmission lines. Amplitude Consultants has estimated the cost of undergrounding HumeLink to be 1.1 to 1.5 times the cost of the overhead option. The recently signed contract for the Marinus Link project confirms this to be a conservative estimate. There are significant benefits of undergrounding as follows. There's less impact on biodiversity as there's a smaller easement with undergrounding, and sections can be horizontal directional drilled or tunnelled. There's less risk of bushfires. Consultants Deloitte Access Economics estimated the cost of the 2019-2020 Black Summer bushfires at $230 billion. You only need to stop one bushfire to pay for the extra cost of undergrounding. In July 2021, California announced it's burying 1,000 miles of overhead power lines to reduce the risk of wildfires at a cost of between 15 and 30 billion. When asked about the cost, the CEO said it's too expensive not to do it. Lives are on the line. Underground transmission also has less risk in severe weather. With global warming, severe weather is increasing, both in intensity and frequency. Recent blackouts in Broken Hill that were caused by severe weather will have big costs to businesses and consumers. There was also a major outage in Victoria in February 2024 caused by severe weather, where 620,000 homes and businesses lost power. The cost of the South Australia 2016 blackouts has been put at $367 million. There are other benefits of undergrounding transmission, such as there's no loss of visual amenity, no loss of noise amenity, no loss of the productive efficiency of agriculture, no loss of tourism, and no loss of regional development. In addition to the extensive environmental benefits of HVDC undergrounding, there are important operational benefits. There's less maintenance and there's less transmission losses. We need environmentally responsible transmission as well as generation as we transition to net zero. We can't put our solar farms and wind farms underground for less environmental and community impacts, but we can and should put transmission lines underground. We urge you to require a triple bottom line assessment when planning transmission projects. Give priority to underground cables as a principle in planning, and review the HumeLink project as an overhead line and require it to be delivered underground. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, if I may.
Briefly.
Michael Katz. I was going to talk at length about bushfires, but I have made a written submission which goes into some detail about that, so I'll not talk about that. But more directly to the terms of reference, I want to talk about the current regulatory regime, which is attempting to govern the transition from a coal-based energy system to one built around renewables and low-carbon emission technologies. It is totally unfit for purpose, as many people have said. When the system was established, transmission was treated as a natural monopoly, and as such, transmission assets were treated as regulated assets. While this possibly made sense in the old environment, it doesn't make sense in a brave new world where we're attempting to redesign from scratch our electricity market. The investment in new assets under the current regime is a complex process. It is largely initiated by the development of the ISP, which you're well aware of. There are no costs associated or imposed on transmission network service providers like Transgrid who are proposing an overhead option with a high risk. Indeed, they are required to come up with the least cost alternative in terms of initial capital costs. They do not have to consider the losses, both direct and consequential losses, which come from strong winds, storms and bushfires. The example of Broken Hill, which is still without power as we speak as a result of only moderately high winds destroying the overhead transmission line, servicing the whole region of Broken Hill, shows that the danger of a system which favours the development of overhead lines as opposed to fully costed long-term assets. Charging for transmission which is currently based on the regulated value of the assets, irrespective of usage, does not make sense. Asset owners receive a guaranteed return on their assets independently of usage. This, to my mind, is nonsense. The charges are funded, of course, by levies on consumers, and the critical point is that there are no price signals to inform and influence the allocation of capital to this activity. As such, this is a central planning or industrial policy approach at its worst. We urge the committee to recommend that urgent work be undertaken to explore other models of pricing of transmission assets. If we look at Spain and Canada, they have developed alternative models which may provide some guidance. We cannot expect central planners to efficiently allocate resources to the development of a resilient transmission grid in the absence of information from markets which reflect actual market behaviour. This is compounded by the emergence of what we have described as a regulatory industrial complex. This is the unfortunately over-close relationship which has emerged between various regulators and the transmission companies. This complexity of ownership and relationship is unfortunate and could lead, or possibly already has led, to extremely bad behaviour. We would like to see a change in the approach which would force regulators to take a more distant and arm's length approach to their servicing of the transmission companies. One approach which could be considered is to force the regulators to be funded by fines levied on the transmission companies. This would make them self-funded and would actually cause a great deal of distance to be established. However, the key point is that while this non-market-based approach to transmission is in place, we are not destined to have an efficient market-based solution to the development and change management of our electricity grid. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else, briefly, just so we've got time for the senators to ask questions? Yes, Ms Johnson. You're on mute, Ms Johnson.
My apologies. Thank you so much for the invitation to appear at this inquiry because, as you may be aware, our group did not do a submission to the inquiry, but I was invited to appear. As I said, I'm the chair of the Moorabool and Central Highlands Power Alliance, and we trade as the Regional Victoria Power Alliance. If I may give a really brief overview of our groups and our the way we've worked, would that be okay?
Very briefly, I know the senators have questions.
Sure.
If you're just going to put the structure, it might be better off just putting that on notice. in writing?
Sure. Well, what I've done is as I said, I've this morning I provided the committee with a much longer statement, which goes into some detail about the toing and froing of these two projects, because as I said, there's Western Renewables Link, which goes from the western outskirts of Melbourne all the way west to Bulgana, which is near Ararat, and then VNI West, or the Victorian section, which goes all the way northwards to the Murray River. So in that statement, as I said, there's a lot of detail, so I'd be grateful if the committee would accept that and publish it as RVPA's submission. And obviously if that statement raises further questions upon reading, I'm happy to be contacted at a later date. I'm hoping that isn't taking too much time and I can answer questions.
And very, very kind of you.
Just quickly, Vicky, we wanted to say we're from Wallaloo and Gree District Alliance. We represent a group of farmers and landowners, and we really wanted to we deal with AMO on the ground. We wanted to really share some of what we'd call horrendous experiences that we've lived in our community, and inform you of what has led to what is hundreds of farmers locking AMO off their land and saying they will not deal with this organisation at all. They won't be getting our properties. VNI West will not be coming through this area. That's what we wanted to share. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. That's why this inquiry was set up. I might move to questions. Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for being here today, giving up your time. I know you must be getting some fatigue from all of this, but it is important. Can I start where I think the speakers just left off, just on the consultation, the discussions you've had with any of the transmission planners that you've had to be involved in? Take us through what that process has been, and it sounds like there's been some frustration. So maybe if you could concentrate on what you think has been inadequate and what could be better, either going forward for you or in other areas.
Yeah, great. We would just like to say that our community has experienced what we've decided to call a search and destroy mission by AMO. They really, from the moment they stepped into our communities and couldn't answer our questions or had their microphones not working, and then they tried to put us into small groups so that we couldn't be with our friends and family. They've targeted widows and more vulnerable people in our community consistently. Grievances have been lodged around this. There's been false claims to police about community members assaulting or being abusive. And all this is documented extremely well. Lots has been reported, lodged as a complaint to AMO, and then it's gone on to Andrew Dyer because it hasn't been actioned. And yeah, I guess it's really just been one, disappointing and completely shocking. And yeah, everyone has had an experience they just couldn't believe would be part of their life and run by our own government. Did you want to add to that?
Sorry.
No, you're right. I'll just got some follow-ups to you before we go on to others, which we can do.
Sure.
But you pair, if you like, finish. Yep.
Okay. So I suppose there's been a number of situations. So specifically, AMO has released documentation saying that they have Section 93 powers, which gives them authority to enter our land, and also compulsory acquisition powers. And they said that in meetings, and they also put it in their landholder guides. That was later found to be they didn't have that, and I think they also said it on the radio. And they actually had to remove that from their documentation, which I know Vicky was also involved in. That's just one example. So I suppose, basically saying we have this power, we're going to do this. They didn't have the power. When that was pointed out, they then said we're applying for a licence and we expect to get that imminently. Also not true. They've just recently applied for it now, which we think is concerning, considering the only reason they want a licence is to coerce and bully to get onto people's land. And so I think it really clearly shows the kind of behaviour that we're facing. But as Cindy was saying, also there's been behaviour where there's like a young leader in the community has brought in like a stereo system so that the older people in the community can actually hear in the meetings, even though we don't get any answers. And they tried to take it off him, and then because they have security at all these meetings, and they actually put him on the ground. They actually physically handled him and took him down to the ground. And so, in small rural communities, these things are shocking to see and and to be part of, I suppose. And I think it's important that, you know, that the politicians and everybody understands what these organisations are doing on the ground and how that's impacting us all. And, I suppose.
Thank you. Sorry, it's the Chair here. Can I just ask a clarifying question? What licence was that you referred to that AEMO is applying for?
So in Victoria, and if I don't get it exactly correct, I'm sure Vicky will probably correct me on it, but you need to have it's called a Section 93 to actually to be able to force access onto people's land, and also, you know, compulsory acquisition powers. So they were claiming to have that, and they actually put it in writing, and they also said it at meetings, but it wasn't actually. They didn't have that at all, and that they.
Thank you. I just want to get that on record. Senator Canavan, you have the call back.
Okay, thank you. I will come to others, so just a quick couple of follow-ups, just so it's fresh in my mind, but I will give everybody an opportunity. You mentioned targeting of widows. What do you mean by that? How were they targeted, or why were they targeted? Is that for compulsory acquisition?
No, they don't have powers of compulsory acquisition. They would visit single women who live at home in the towns or on farms alone, and they had been requested by maybe the husband and the family that work in the farms not to go to those houses, to come and speak with them, and they would continue to go back to those houses of people that we consider are the most vulnerable.
So, you know, widows that live on their farms, you know, K's out from town, sort of with no one else around them, they'd be visiting them and with a number of people, and sort of, they were quite... It's
extraordinarily intimidating. They asked that they would deal with them via email and not be on their property, and then they would come back.
They'd come anyway, even though they were asked not to.
People have now got cameras up, so now they can see what
people are frightened. It's frightened.
Right. They are frightened.
I mean, that raises the issue of, do you think there needs to be any future elements of this needs to allow the proponent should have to help fund legal representation for people at these meetings? Like, if it's a lot for a widow to be sitting there having to deal with these issues without anybody on the other side for them defending their rights?
Yes, they would say that they do provide some financial assistance for legal.
They do they?
If you want to pursue that line.
Okay.
But maybe they could follow their own procedures, and when grievances are made, take action and those staff be responsible for some of their behaviour.
I mean, I think there are laws about if someone's asked you not to come to your house. I believe there are laws about not coming to their house anyway. So I think there's kind of, you know, expected behaviour that these companies, these organisations, you know, particularly one the size of AEMO, with the responsibility that holds, to be behaving in a specific way.
And the other one I just want to follow up with you is you said they isolate you in small groups. Did you have opportunities for town hall meetings and what have you, so everybody got to hear concerns?
No, they won't do that. They want to put you into small groups. They'll talk to 3 or 4 at once, which is completely unsatisfactory because there's certainly some people that are not competent enough to speak. It's hard to understand how to get your questions articulated, and it's just not acceptable. So certainly meetings have been closed. They've walked. There's been major problems.
Well, that's just an old tactic to divide you all and also avoid you actually sharing concerns you might have and convincing others.
And understanding that other people have concerns as well that are similar.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, let's travesty. Sorry about that. I know I might use all my time on this, Chair, but that's okay. I'll go to others now. I think, Ms Johnson, you had some points to make. Over to you.
Thank you, Senator. I just wanted to follow through with what Marcia and Cindy said. The licence that they were talking about is a transmission licence, so it's to actually allow the company, or it says that the company will transmit electricity, but it gives them other authority under the Electricity Industry Act, and that's at Section 93. Along the line, so Marcia and Cindy, Marcia is actually on our RVPA steering committee that I'm chair of. We are strongly allied, and I can speak though to many of the Western Renewable Link experiences, which has involved AusNet. AusNet is the project contractor for Western Renewables Link. In the case of Western Renewables Link, we didn't even know that the project existed until a year after the RIT was completed and 6 months after AusNet was contracted. So there was utterly no engagement whatsoever. The Western Renewables RIT started in 2017. We've had it landed on us as well. And unfortunately, that was in COVID times. So it was extremely stressful. There's been not a single town hall meeting. There's been a lot of webinars. There's been a lot of drop-in sessions that people have found extremely satisfactory because they were getting different answers to their neighbours, entirely different answers to their neighbours. We didn't even have experts at the meetings. And as it went on, as the engagement and consultation became more and more fraught over the years, meetings were cancelled because AusNet felt that they were being threatened, which they weren't. They were the ones who always had security there. And they even have security now in trying to access people's land. They do have a transmission licence, so they do have that Section 93 ability. But there are plenty of stories of them knocking over a man in the early days, trying to move his pregnant mares because they'd already jumped the fence. That was actually filmed and appeared on A Current Affair early in the years. We've been fighting Western Renewables Link for 4.5 years now, and Marcia and Cindy have been fighting VNOS for 1.5, and we've been combined fighting for 1.5. So the examples that both of us all three of us could give, could literally take an entire day to give the examples of the entirely poor treatment that communities, the misinformation, the deception that we've all suffered.
Thank you. And maybe Mr. Katz next. Did you want anything about consultation? Add anything?
Well, I would support the previous speakers in saying that Transgrid's consultation has been very nearly appalling, if not worse than that. They, in particular, offered all of us along the HumeLink line an option agreement which had a ridiculous structure. It provided 110% of everything that Transgrid would require early on in the process against a $20,000 payment, which in the context of what they were trying to do was can only be described as chicken feed. And it was enough to get some of the very small landholders, I think, to accept it, because for them it was a realistic amount. But for the larger landholders who understood what it was, that this was absolutely outside the gamut of what should be allowed, because at no stage has Transgrid had anything other than a very small opportunity to compulsorily acquire the actual easement for the line, whereas the option gave them the opportunity to use, without acquiring, anything they wanted to, basically. And so I thought the structure of their proposal from the very beginning was outrageous.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Strong.
Yes, I think the community engagement review undertaken by Andrew Dyer speaks to the incredible failures of engagement. 92% of respondents were dissatisfied with engagement. Damning. In addition, something a little bit more specific to HumeLink. In early 2023, Transgrid said in a community consultative group meeting that they were going to contact the 4,322 indirectly impacted landowners. Now, they had mentioned contacting those landowners back in 2021. We said, if you're going to contact them, we would like to see the brochures you're going to send, because the early contact with landowners that were directly impacted had no images of what they were actually building in the first brochure and later brochures, not showing the actual towers, showing towers of a smaller transmission line. So it was, it had been raised in 2021. We're up to 2023. These indirectly impacted landowners, now they're going to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially in the value of their property. Because they're indirectly impacted, they'll receive no compensation. They're likely to be strongly opposed to the transmission line. Transgrid in early 23 said they were going to directly contact those people, door knock them. Well, landowners in the district went out and did door knock those landowners, and in early 2024 most of them knew nothing of the project, and so this is a major failure of Transgrid's consultation. And when they were so that's 2024. The environmental impact statement submissions closed on the 10th of October 2023. So they had no opportunity for input to ensure that the best route was selected that minimised impacts. Yes, very disappointing.
Look, thank you, Chair. I had more questions, but I think it was important to let people disclose those experiences. Thank you. Thank you all.
Senator Gosh.
Thank you, Chair, and may I say thank you to the witnesses for appearing today and giving evidence. In terms of the evidence you've given, some of that's quite distressing, but in terms of what you would want to see in terms of consultation and engagement on these projects, what are the sorts of things that are going to be effective and are going to alleviate some of these concerns? Putting aside the bad behaviour, what are the consultation and engagement mechanisms that you think you would want to see are going to be effective?
So you can talk to them.
Yeah. Okay.
Just one thing.
Yeah. Look, I just want to say, you know, I think that this whole thing falls down right at the beginning because agriculture and regional communities are not considered at all. The importance of agriculture itself, the importance of food production, the importance of the communities that do that are not considered. They're not mentioned anywhere. They're not even considered stakeholders. You know, they are just basically, it's an afterthought when they get on the ground. And I think if agriculture and as an entirety was actually considered in the way that it should be and the importance that it should have, then we wouldn't be facing this issue, because the way this would be happening would be to minimise these impacts straight up. And something like VNO West, for example, which is a completely unnecessary transmission line, which is only going to allow three wind factories onto it, you know, for the cost of it, the whole project is an absolute farce. And the amount of damage that it's going to be done to the community and to agricultural land biodiversity because of a ridiculous project. It wouldn't be happening if agriculture and our food production was considered in the way that it should be. And I suppose in Victoria, it's really apparent where the Victorian government actually wrote a report, the Victorian, it was Offshore Winds Direction paper in 2022, where they stated that up to 70% of all Victorian agricultural land will be required for wind and solar. I mean, that in itself kind of shows the complete ignorance and complete lack of understanding about our food, the importance of our food, and it should be in terms of, you know, government, our own sovereignty, our own security. Like COVID should have taught us that we need to be protecting very, very carefully our very precious and, to be honest, and very limited. We have a very small amount of agricultural land that compared to other nations, that is actually of productive, viable, productive agricultural land, and we should be protecting that as our number one, you know, most special thing that we hold. Yeah. And I think if that was happening, then none of this, we wouldn't be facing any of this rubbish. Food security becomes before energy security, and this is not, it's not even being considered. And every time it's brought up, it's just like pushed to the background. Like, we've been to a number of these things and it's never considered. And when it's brought up, it's like, oh, it will sort it out when we get to the end somehow.
When we've got no food left.
When we've got no food left. And
that's exactly.
I also wanted to just very quickly say that the Paris Agreement, which is behind all of this, actually states that we need, as part of that, which is, I won't go on, we need to, in a manner that does not threaten food production. And that is not nowhere in all of the policies that actually being adhered to. So I think I just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
I think the other thing I would add to that, if I may, is that the consultation which takes place is largely irrelevant anyway, because as soon as a serious objection is raised, you fall back on the problem that all of these decisions are governed by the regulatory infrastructure, which consists of ISP followed by RIT-T followed by all this word salad of acronyms.
Yeah.
And those do not add up to a proper system of developing long-term assets to change the way we deliver energy. And that's why your committee, I think, has a duty to reinvestigate the very fundamentals of the regulatory process, to actually start charging for transmission instead of treating it as a sunk cost, to actually look at things properly from a market perspective and from an environmental perspective, and to look at things in that way rather than the current way, which is set up with so much complexity that people like us, even with some experience, find it incredibly difficult to navigate this amazing web of organisations and sub-organisations with almost unlimited budgets to throw lawyers at us and any other objectors.
And if I could just have some input to this discussion on consultation. The consultation isn't going to result in what needs to happen. What needs to happen is the rules need to be changed so that so AEMO, in developing the integrated system plan, and transmission network service providers, when they're looking at different options, when they're comparing an overhead option to an underground option, are required to take into account all the costs. They need to do that. So then they will look at the least cost option for the nation as a whole. And they'll take into account the costs of bushfires. They'll take into account the costs of severe weather. They'll take into account the costs of loss in biodiversity and the loss in visual amenity, the loss of our landscapes of great natural beauty. It's critically important that, first of all, they're assessing these things on a triple bottom line. The consultation, you talk to them about the fact that they're not coming up with the least cost overall option, and they say, well, the rules don't require us to take into account those costs, and therefore they dismiss the option. It's critically important that those costs are taken into account, and we get the option that's least cost overall for the nation, which will often be the underground option.
Thank you, Chair. No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I ceded my time to my colleagues here, so I won't put any questions today. I might have some on notice. I would, however, like to acknowledge the very good work of Commissioner Dyer, who many of you mentioned before, and thank him for his work. And I'm sure the new Commissioner will continue to do an outstanding job, and I look forward to putting some questions to him in estimates next week. Thank you all for appearing. If there are any other statements that or submissions you wish to make, please do. Any questions that you ask to take on notice, if they could also be provided by Wednesday, 13 November 2024. Thank you. Thank you for appearing. Now I call Dr. David Carland. Dr. Cullen, for Hansard, will you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
My name is David Carland. I'm Executive Director of Australian Resources Development Proprietary Limited.
Thank you. Would you like to make a short opening statement?
Yes, briefly, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity. I've been writing in this area for several years, and sometimes you're not sure where this is getting, but I've kept at it. My sort of approach to this was to try and take a higher level look at the ISP and what it was actually doing. It says it's a plan, but it actually describes itself as an optimal pathway, not a plan, a pathway, and we might come back to that because I think it's quite important, especially some of the things said earlier about planning. My first major issue is under the National Electricity Objective. The ISP is required to make sure renewable energy targets are met in terms of essentially carbon dioxide emissions. The ISP assumes that this can only be met by firmed renewables. No other option is looked at. There's I think about 10 little buttons here you can tick in the spreadsheets, but you can go to counterfactual and you see all the coal plants shutting it all the time, no other form of technology, just various levels of intensity of batteries versus storage versus generation, etc. And in particular, there's no analysis of the nuclear option, which is another way of getting to low emissions. The reason it's not analysed, and it's directly said by AEMO, that technology is banned. Now, I think that this is a highly disingenuous statement. Because a particular technology is banned doesn't stop us from analysing it. It hasn't stopped another committee analysing it here. It hasn't stopped the CSIRO analysing it here. It hasn't stopped AUKUS in the investigation of nuclear submarines. So I think that's a very sort of limp reason not to investigate nuclear. Second, and I think this comes to this pathway versus plan, the ISP does not produce realistic projections. It seems to develop this optimal plan with a load calling for various generation investments and closures and gas and backup to meet reliability. And it has a very strong growth in wind and solar and batteries, coal plant shutting. AEMO has another publication, the Electricity Statement of Opportunities, which comes out about 2 months later. And that's focused on reliability, not about optimising, not about growth, not about path. And they look out 10 years. And by 2031, the 10th year for the latest, I looked at the 2031 as the last year I looked at, the difference in gigawatts in the system was 30 gigawatts. ISP says 100 would be built in operation. ESO says 70. And where that difference is, big, and the ESO looks at anticipated and committed projects, not optimising anything. That's what they really look at doing. The wind projects aren't coming forward at the rate of being sort of through the optimal path, and perhaps what I've just listened to may be a reason. The battery aren't developing or anticipated and committed aren't developing. And the irony is the only reason we've got 70 megawatts is Eraring stayed open. And I think we'll come back to that on dealing with risk. My third thing is the ISP significantly underestimates the cost of all this. We are told that the step change scenario cost is 122 billion, of which 16 billion is transmission. I've gone through and I've done in my paper in detail a brief statement. That excludes the non-capital costs of the existing plant. It excludes the cost of the existing generation assets, transmission and distribution assets. It excludes, and the one that I think is quite worrying, is it includes the cost of investment in the distribution network. As the ISP goes forward, and heard earlier today, it's relying on this CER, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on the distribution network, backflowing, increasing scale, and associated cost. The ISP says it relies on this to deliver the plan or as part of the plan, but it will pay for, I think it says something like it will be paid for in another way, completely excluded from the cost. And the last thing is the cost of the subsidies for these schemes. And when all these costs are included, I had a back of the envelope pop at this, and I think it could be $0.6 trillion. And if someone doesn't like that number, I invite them to tell me what the right number is. And I think someone asked a very relevant question. No one's investigated the distribution and how much this is going to cost. And it's very difficult to put a handle on it. But what I do know is the regulated asset base of the distribution network is nearly 4 times that of transmission. The claim, and I think this has kind of been settled, but throughout the ISP, reference is made to affordable electricity. And if you actually work your way through it, it confuses lower cost electricity with affordable electricity. And I've got a chart in my submission showing the significant rise in real electricity prices over the last couple of decades. So lower cost doesn't mean affordable, and if AEMO wishes to sustain this claim, it'll need to explain why federal and state governments feel the need to subsidise electricity for retailers. Why would you do that if it's affordable? And secondly, that chart I talked about, if it's affordable, what was it 5 years ago? Really, really affordable? So the increase in price. And finally, we're continually hearing it, renewables are the lowest cost. Well, I go back to my point about never investigating nuclear. If the only thing you investigate here is renewables, you've got no basis for that statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. Look, it's a very useful submission, Dr. Carland, so thank you for that. I just wanted to explore the point you made about the difference between the ISP and the ESOO. You have a chart on your submission at page 8, which compares the projected energy sources in the next 7-8 years between the ISP and the ESOO. The stark differences. Can you just explain a bit? The ESOO, we kind of know what the ISP did from last week's hearing on how they get to those numbers with carbon budgets and other carbon climate policies.
Sorry, that's the ESOO.
Sorry, the ISP. The ISP.
The ISP is
a government policies.
Optimal plan. The world goes forward.
So we kind of know that. How do they determine the ESOO then? What do they do to determine what's there?
It's a little bit opaque, but anticipated and committed projects only.
Okay.
And I think what's actually happening, and I think this is most exposed in the transmission, the ISP, particularly the generation side, the capacity, they're just assuming, well, its model works like, well, we've got a load of umpteen terawatt hours this year. We're heading towards net zero. We've got to meet that condition. We will have to put all this plant in. We'll have to put these batteries in.
Right.
And when in ESO they go and actually look, and it's more akin to planning. I mean, you start planning from a point of reality. And with planning, you can generally have a business plan. I've got a finance background as well as energy. And one would sit down and have a good look at where the next couple of years are going to go before you sort of kick off your sort of optimised plan. So I think that's, and you know, I'm again happy to be corrected if AEMO can tell me that I'm not comparing like with like, and I suspect I mightn't be, but that's the point. The ESO people are very focused on because of reliability gaps that are opening up at a time when you look at the ISP, it's saying the world is lovely, it's all reliable, it's all lower cost.
Is it fair to say then the ISP kind of just assumes a can opener, just assumes that these things will happen
I'm not sure
rather than actually look at the reality of whether they can happen?
Yeah. It has a series of costs, you know, the model, a series of costs. It optimises it, minimises the cost.
Yep.
But it's never asked the question, can the transmission line be built, HumeLink? That doesn't come into it. Whether as ESO, they are looking at that thing. They are looking seriously at what is coming in the near term.
Just going to the price impact here, there was nothing I found underwhelming last week. The look at prices, you've got a chart on in Appendix 3 of your submission, shows the incredible rise in Australian consumer prices. What do you put it down to? Why are our prices so high now relative to some other comparable countries?
I've got another chart, Senator Canavan, but I actually put the real prices on. They're just nominal prices, and I've pointed out a few bumps. If you compare the real price of retail electricity to the share of generation from renewables, there is an uncanny correlation. I'm an econometrician by trade, and I understand correlation is not causation. But again, I put the onus back on, is this just, by happenstance, that as we've pushed more and more renewables into the system, the retail cost of electricity, and a very obvious answer, the bill stack, the thing of sticking in the green taxes into a bill for a start must be directly related. Transmission, etc.
Well, maybe on notice, could you provide us that chart? I've probably seen it before, but it just might be useful for the committee to have.
Straight out of catalogue 6401.
Okay, great. How would you change the ISP then? What do you think needs to change to provide a more realistic projection?
I think they need a plan, and I think Senator Van was saying something earlier in the day. So, financing. The starting point for a sound financing plan is a risk matrix and risk allocation. Sit down, look at all the potential risks you're facing, look at the consequences of those risks, and look at the ways you might mitigate it. This instance, compare the ISP with ESO as we've just been doing. What could we do if the wind capacity development doesn't come, or the batteries? What could we do? There's nothing in it. There's no fallback. There's no plan B. I think it's quite ironic. The default plan B is leave the coal plants open. And so if you would really seriously look at the ISP and say, so what's your mitigating factor? It looks like it's to leave the coal plants open.
And they're getting older and harder to maintain or invest in.
Well, they're getting older. I've been involved, as you know, in buying old power plants in Queensland, whatever. It's not so much the old issue. It's grandfather's axe and a lot of it. There are creep life issues. There is an end of life. But the dispatch regime, and I was watching it last week, watching that explained. We're backing all these people off. I looked half an hour ago, there were negative prices all over the place.
Right.
Tonight at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, they'll be $200-300.
Yeah.
That's because the coal plants are keeping going and they're keeping pressure up in their boilers, and a lot of them haven't got generator steam bypass, so that's costing them significant money to keep the pressure up, to be there to gain the benefit of supplying the load. So I think there are two issues to be looked at, and for years I've been saying this, that we need to have some mechanism that allows the coal generators to run at min-gen levels. And this massive amount of rooftop solar pouring into the market, as an economist would say, it's worthless. It's got a negative value. It's actually kind of...
We're having to tax people now.
Yeah, it's like a Swiss bank account. You actually had to pay a negative interest for the security of keeping your money there. That's how they sorted that out. So reducing all this power that no one wants.
Maybe just get you to expand on that from the evidence last week. It seemed to me that we've got this situation, we're already starting to impose taxes now on solar exports to the grid because of the excess solar. The government's got a capacity investment scheme which will encourage more grid-scale solar, but potentially encourage that. Won't that just exacerbate this?
Yeah, absolutely. The only reason we've got so far with renewables is because we had some excess capacity in some older coal plants. And I know intimately the Gladstone station, and it can go from 280 to 100 times 6. So during the day, there's a lot of megawatts sitting in there.
Yep.
It's been able to come up and take the load. If you force those coal plants off with more, so if you keep pushing renewables into Queensland, Gladstone won't be able to keep going during the day. They'll go to a 4-unit operation or 2. I think they're already on low units over weekends and stuff. You won't be able to keep the lights on. I know the solution. We'll have the Victorian Mornington Peninsula solution or the Adelaide Oval solution. You'll have gensets sitting on the back of trucks connected to an oil tanker to make sure we don't have outages. So it comes to a point and that someone really needs to sit down with a real plan of how this is going to work.
Okay.
Or sorry, a realistic plan.
Just finally from me then, Chair, just you do mention nuclear in your submission as well. Is that another thing you think the ISP should look at? Should look at least look at the cost and possibility of
it should look
nuclear?
at all technologies and not look at a particular one because it's banned. I mean, is offshore wind fully approved and whatever? Doesn't stop them from looking at it.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Hydrogen too, for example.
Look at that. Look at it. I'm kind of agnostic on this. I just think we should have the lowest cost here. But I can't have people saying I don't agree. Sorry, that renewables they can say that renewables are the lowest cost way of delivering a low emission outcome.
Yeah.
Until they look at nuclear. And let's have the big debate about how much per kilowatt is it, and etc., and safety and whatever.
All right. Thank you, Chair. I'd have more, but I realise there's time.
I'll just check with Senator Grogan, who's joined us in place of Senator Gosh.
Okay.
Senator Grogan, do you have questions? Senator Grogan?
Can you hear me?
I can now. Thank you.
Yes,
Welcome.
I'm terribly sorry. I'm in the car, so please excuse the quality of the sound. Dr. Garland, thank you so much for coming in this afternoon. I really appreciate it. Can I just start? I'm interested in your perspective on nuclear energy. The AER chair and a number of other experts, both in this inquiry but also in the other nuclear inquiry that's also running at the same time, have said that that the timeframes may not line up, so that nuclear is too slow to really play a role in replacing coal as it's currently structured to exit, which, as we know, is a decision made by the coal plants. What's your view on the potential role of nuclear power, and would that really require the coal to be extended? So would we have to look at extending those coal plants?
Thank you. I always make a joke at this stage. My name is Carland, and it wasn't my grandmother who wrote the books, but no one gets that joke right. Look, two things. Thank you. My view is put the nuclear into the planning framework, put realistic assumptions in there. I heard yesterday 11 years. OK, put that in, put its cost in, and look how that can be fitted in together with, or compare it with renewables. Because part of my discussion to date is, I guess, leading to the point I don't think renewables are going to fill the hole either. Or put it this way, they're clearly, by observation, not filling the hole at the moment. We've kept Eraring open, your lawn's going to stay open, and my gut feel is we're going to have to keep them going for a hell of a lot longer until either renewables do the job or nuclear does the job, or some combination thereof, which gives us the least cost outcome. So I totally accept, and the nuclear group were here yesterday, perhaps in the other, another meeting, and if it's 11 years, it's 11 years. The old, what's the best time to plant a tree? 11 years ago. If you didn't plant 11 years ago, what's the best time to plant a tree? Plant the tree now. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not a nuclear advocate by any means. I'm certainly, and I'm not, I don't think meeting emissions targets is a bad thing, or it's a worthwhile thing. That's fine. I just think we should take a realistic view of how we're going to get there.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So I did note, and I may have heard you wrong, that you said you were buying coal plants in Queensland.
Oh, years ago, in part of my career, we bought the Gladstone Power Station. It was quite an old power station, but just a point of fact, we did major engineering studies of its life. We bought it in 1994. It's in the public domain. Its contracts run until 2029, and my mates around the place still say it's running quite okay. Its biggest issue is getting on the system. It's not got mine mouth coal. So it's, in a sort of marginal cost sort of basis, it's pretty high. And it, I think, has trouble staying on when there's huge amount and growing amounts of particularly PV power is in the system. So that's my experience with that.
Great, thank you. So if we were to look at nuclear, how much capacity do you think is required in the system? We know that the policy being put forward by the coalition is seven sites. How much nuclear capacity do you think we would need?
Yeah, in some sense, it's like mathematics. You tell me its capacity factor, how much it produces. If you're going to back it off during the day and bring it through in the night, which nuclear power actually works quite well because its fuel cost is quite low once you've bought it. It'll tell you in a sense how sort of many you need. But again, I think that's a number that the AEMO technical people, modelling people, should be able to do relatively easily. My bigger issue is and I think this is what needs to come out, and all the stuff we just talked about. We won't need the transmission lines from the reses, and we won't need this growth in their distribution network to the extent with which we're now talking about. So, at the wholesale level, the numbers will be but the numbers, but let's say they're more expensive than firmed energy, but it's almost, a matter to be worked out. But certainly the distribution and transmission costs will be much lower if we build on existing sites.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that the site's total is around 11 gigawatts, I think, which is about 4% of the capacity that we'll need by 2050, according to my emo. So what would you see as that nuclear plant distribution around Australia to make up what we would need?
Sorry, the 11 gigawatts are 11 gigawatts of what? What technology? Sorry, I didn't hear.
I think it's the coal capacity for the nuclear part. So that's what would go in. So we would be effectively the 11 gigawatts of the 7 sites is what I believe it is, would equate to 4% of that capacity that we're going to have in 2050. So that would be the coal capacity we have now, but also the increase in demand that we would be expecting.
Load growth, sure, yeah. Yeah, but the benefit of putting them on existing sites is the transmission networks are thick and they're there. We don't have any social licence issues. What you may be alluding to, we may.
Sorry, my point was how much would we need? Because 7 wouldn't do it. I wouldn't have thought. But my expertise is not in how big you can make a nuclear power plant.
Well, my answer, okay, I understand. What I'd say, and it's not a question I'm going to answer here, I'm happy to go away and think about it if you want to, but you're going to have to to tell me the capacity factor of those units. Because if I'm going to run them at 50%, I'll have to double the amount. And obviously the dollars a kilowatt hour are going to double.
To be perfectly honest, I don't think anyone's modelled that, so I'm not sure. So I might kind of go away and have a think about that and scope that up into a question on notice, if that's all right.
That's fine.
Chair, I think the issue is, Senator Grogan, you need to adjust the capacity, adjust the AEMO figures for the capacity factor of solar and wind. So it's not directly comparable to nuclear. When you say 4% of capacity, if nuclear is running at 90% and solar at 20% and wind at 30%, it's just quite hard to compare them. It's not they're not apples for apples.
And that's why, Senator.
Thank you very much.
You need to do a system analysis.
Yeah.
That running in the system, something else running in the system. What's the total system cost?
Yes, indeed. So what I'm trying to get to, without unpacking it to a highly technical scenario, is that how much would we need? So let me take that away and bring it to you on notice, just to save us. I know we're short on time. So
happy
can
to
I
respond.
just Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to touch on the inclusion of emissions reduction alongside the issues of affordability and reliability in the national energy objectives. What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, AEMO has been doing this for several plans. Previously, it used to say, we've put in the assumption that we'll meet government emission targets because we think it's in the best interest of the community. So AEMO has had a view on it all along. Putting them in, my issue with putting them in is policies are transient. The Labor Party in 2019 took a 43% reduction to the 2019 election. At the next election, it's 82%, and then that morphs into net zero 2050, and no one's got clean hands. The Liberals, I think November 21, before the Glasgow thing, the Liberal National Party came out with a plan for net zero 2050, which had nearly as absurd projections of how rich we're going to be in the future. So I think that's probably my issue, Senator, that in 3 years' time, and it actually make it very difficult for AEMO, they could be chasing their tails. You know, it's all the state government plans as well as the federal plan, and these targets could change. So they've got to now rework the whole thing. That's my problem with that. Whereas cost minimisation is pretty universal. It's not going to change.
But the issue of emissions reductions in terms of recognising it in the national energy objective, regardless of sort of your interpretation of Labor policy or whatever, emissions reduction is. Well, let me ask you the question as opposed to say. Would you say that emissions reduction is something that is an international focus, that there's many countries, particularly countries that we trade with, who are very keen and dedicated to emissions reduction? Mm-hmm. Would you disagree with that?
No, that's a societal decision. Everything I've written, I've said that. It's not that I've got any objection to low emissions outcomes. I say it's not a bad thing, and I say it's worthwhile. My issue is you should tell people the cost. That's all. Because I think I heard, telling you, the people of a goodwill, they want to do the right thing, and they've been told that renewables are lower cost. And that's my challenge to that. I've got no view. It is society's view. It's their call. Net zero 2050 has bipartisan support in this country, so no question of that.
Okay, so sort of building on that, as you say, the 2050 target is an agreed bipartisan scenario. Would you also agree that the burning of fossil fuels is the primary driver of dangerous climate change? And from that, as a result, there is an imperative to move away from fossil fuel generation? I'm
not going to answer those sort of questions, thanks. I wrote a submission about the ISP.
Okay.
You've walked me into now. You want to entangle me in some sort of environmental thing. I'm not interested. I've tried to look at the figures. I've made my point about cost. I've made my point about agreeing with the current policies. I'll leave it at that, thanks.
Oh, Dr. Garland, I'm sorry if I've offended you in any way. It certainly
I'm inoffendable, Senator. I'm an ex-investment banker. I am totally inoffendable, and my name is Carland. Thank you.
That's what I said, Carland.
Oh, okay.
I've got it right here in front of me.
Okay.
I do try and get people's names right, and I do try not to offend. So my apologies.
You were
Dr.
safe
Carland.
with me. Thank you.
Thank you.
You done, Senator Grogan?
Yes, thank you, Chair, I am. Thank
Terrific.
you.
Senator Canavan, you've
got one more. This is time. You mentioned nuclear should be included, etc. What about coal? Should we look at investing in new coal-fired power stations, at least look at the cost?
Well, that's almost the same question. I came here under the ISP, and under the ISP, the National Electricity Objective is meet emissions targets. So in that environment, go ahead and building new coal plants is not within, if you like, the remit of AEMO. Would it be a cheaper outcome? Would it be it's something we go away and test, but it'll certainly blow the emissions.
Yeah. I thought I heard
my issue on coal is.
Sorry. I thought I heard you mention, though, it's useful to look at a lowest cost scenario. I mean, do you think it's useful? What I'm saying is, I'm not saying.
No, I did that 2 submissions ago, and I got pilloried in the Guardian for being someone who suggested a coal-only scenario. And I think, with all due respect, where that was heading, and people go and Google me, and they come up with that.
Oh,
that was
I still think I'm beating you, Dr. Cowan. I know.
That was a completely different context. But in a sense, as an analysis, for instance, what carbon tax do we need?
Yeah.
And the way you would go set the carbon tax is to run the coal-only scenario and look what taxes you need to put in place to
Well, it won't even tell us the shadow carbon price. I don't know if you followed that.
I know.
AEMO won't even reveal
I
to us
understand that, but I'm just saying
the shadow carbon price.
The rational way to do it is run the coal-only scenario, and that tells you the cost of doing anything.
Yeah.
And again, Senator, it might be perfectly fine and acceptable. The community wants that. Perfect.
Yeah, but it would be useful at least to know the cost of.
Well, that's my point. I think people aren't being told. They've been told renewables are lower costs.
Yeah.
And so and people are of goodwill, and they've been put in a world where not only it's doing the right thing for the environment, it's cheap.
Yeah.
And I think that's my graph, and that's all sort of falling apart.
Yeah, I think people are waking up to it.
So don't accuse me of heaven.
I certainly can't accuse someone of being too pro-coal. I think that might not fly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cullen. I don't have any questions other than to recognise the work you did in your submission. Is excellent looking at the economics of the ISP, etc. So thank you for appearing
Thanks
today.
very much. Appreciate the chance.
And thank you to the Secretariat and Hansard for looking after us today. And we will be back tomorrow morning. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.